Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody. I'm wearing white, Bill, because Labor Day is coming, and I'm told it's a faux pas if I wear white afterwards.
I didn't realize you were so fashion conscious, man.
I feel like if you're in a place like Palm Beach, you could wear white year round. But in West
West
Virginia,
Virginia.
we adhere to very strict protocol and etiquette.
If you show up to church after Labor Day wearing white, what are people going to say in the town square?
Well, it'll just be a lot of gossip about me. They won't kick me out of church or anything like that, but there'll be a lot of whispers about me not getting the memo. So I don't want that to happen. Here I am, sporting the white, and I got to tell you, man, it's a beautiful day here. It is. I know this is riveting conversation for people around the country, but it's one of those. It's September 1st, Bill, and it feels like it.
Now, I saw the other day um, that there is an electric battery plant. Right. This is an article in Associated Press. Electric battery maker to locate factory in northern West Virginia. Batteries will be built at a 482,000 square foot plant in Taylor County off Route 50 near Bridgeport. Is that near you?
No.
No, okay. Plant will eventually employ 350 workers. Originally at a glass factory that ceased operations in 2009, the plant will produce cobalt-free batteries, an effort to bring down the cost of U.S. lithium-ion battery production. The Democratic Republic of Congo has historically been the top producer of cobalt worldwide, with most mines controlled by Chinese companies. So it seems like to me, not just the Joe Manchin vision being implemented, bringing back clean energy manufacturing into the U.S., but also the Hillary Clinton vision. This is what she talked about in 2016 and was maligned for it as being disrespectful to coal. Uh, do you think West Virginia is appreciating what Democrats have been doing for them?
No. But I would say, just as an American, we have to find a way to get lithium and all these minerals and batteries, and I don't know what West Virginia can do to help, but bring it on. And I got to tell you, so like if West Virginia is like this, I'm like right there,
Right.
just the tip, Bill, barely
Well,
in the state.
but you're north, right?
Yeah, but I think, and I'm not an expert on the state, interestingly, but there's a lot of different ways to be north. Like you could be near
Yeah,
Pittsburgh, for
yeah, yeah.
example, and be north, but nowhere near me.
You're Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh, Bill, a couple things to run by you today, but you know what? Let's start with Mitch. I'm interested with Mitch McConnell in the
Yeah.
last 24 hours. Now, okay, so everybody knows Mitch McConnell, former majority leader, now the Senate minority leader, widely seen, I think, as being a very shrewd political operator, but he's getting up in years, and we've had just in the past 24 hours, I saw a story where he's like sort of in a tiff with Peter Thiel because Peter Thiel funded these candidates like J.D. Vance in Ohio, Blake Masters in Arizona, and Thiel pours all this money into these guys who may not have won their primary, would not have won their primary without it. He gets them nominated, and then he wants to walk away and expect Mitch
Weird.
McConnell to carry him over, the finish line. And McConnell's basically saying like, well, don't bank on that. And then Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, who was in charge, I guess he's the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee this year, seems to be in Politico criticizing McConnell. Remember when McConnell said that candidate quality could impact the Senate races, implying
Yep.
that. So Rick Scott has taken shots at McConnell now. At least that's my interpretation. So what in the world is going on here?
I mean, Republicans in disarray. I mean, this is really unusual in a midterm year. Midterm year, typically, the president's party is in disarray because you're governing. You got to make tough choices. You can't do everything that your base wants. Some things don't pan out the way you want them to, unexpected developments. And the opposition party, you know, everybody has their divisions, but when you're on the outs, you can easy to paper over them and just focus. Let's just beat up the president's party. Let's put all our BS aside. Just focus on what they're doing wrong. And that script is completely flipped right now.
We haven't talked about this yet, Bill, but I think there's a conventional wisdom is beginning to emerge that suggests that because Donald Trump never really went away, and that's because he wants to run again, and because of the Mar-a-Lago stuff and the January 6th stuff, because Donald Trump never really went away, and because of the Dobbs decision, that in effect, the dynamic of a midterm where the incumbent party, the incumbent president's party, is basically, it's a referendum on them, that because Trump never really went away, that dynamic doesn't really exist. And so this is not a normal midterm, which we've figured out in the past month.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you make of that as a reason behind it?
Well, I've written about this in a couple different pieces as of late. My most recent one in the Washington Monthly, but then actually I leaned on an academic paper that was produced in 2010, which actually rejects the argument that a midterm is a referendum election. The conventional wisdom is that this is a referendum on presidential party performance or presidential performance. And they argue, no, you look at the polling over the last 16 midterms, you can see in the generic congressional ballot, which is various forms of the question, who do you plan to vote for Congress, Democrat or Republican, no names. That the opposition party, that number goes up over the course of the year. It doesn't start out with the pendulum swing, but you end on the pendulum swing. And that trajectory happens regardless of presidential job approval. President can be popular over the course of that time, but the out party is doing better anyway. So they argue there's no correlation here, so it can't be referendum on presidential performance. So their alternative argument is that midterms are a balance election. That
but I would say, even if we assume that that's the ticket, then it's not a referendum,
right.
It's a balance. Well,
right.
Dobbs, and by the way, again, pro-life, I think Roe versus Wade should have been overturned, whatever. I'm throwing that out just in case anyone doesn't.
Don't call Matt Lewis a squish on
where I stand.
pro-life.
But right now I've got my political analyst hat on, okay?
Yeah.
So if it's about balancing, I would argue that the Dobbs decision is the biggest change in the last 2 years, right?
Well, that was the argument that I put forth, that we have a situation where the out party has implemented policy. That doesn't usually happen. The Supreme Court was an instrument of Republican policy, which unleashed more policy at the state level through Republican legislatures and governors and attorney generals. And it's a very imbalancing moment. Things that were no longer are in a lot of places in the country, or if they haven't actually changed yet, there's a fear that they will change soon. And that's just one source of imbalance, because the other source being Trump. You have threats to democracy. You have election deniers being nominated. You have investigations going on, and you have Trump actively talking about running for president and trying to overturn and put people in place to make it sure that he wins, regardless of what the actual results are. So
it's not like Democrats won the presidency and then ran the agenda for the next 2 years and things went south, right? I mean, a lot of things did go south, but they were never really in control. And again, I think you could argue that the biggest public policy shift that has occurred was a quote unquote Republican policy.
I mean, Republicans still have something to say. They can say Democrats spent like drunken sailors and inflation went through the roof. And if you elect us, we're going to clamp down this spending and fix inflation. I mean, that is the best argument that Republicans can make. And I think I said to you and a couple other of our chums on a text previously. Think of what would be going on now if Republicans had a slate of Senate candidates who are all small business owners and all they talked about was inflation and nothing else, and maybe the Supreme Court didn't overturn Roe v. Wade. What would this election be like?
Yeah.
Uh, I
But
mean,
it seems to be,
inflation.
Bill, and it seems to be that wasn't there a politician recently in New York, maybe, that did talk about the special election, that did talk about inflation a lot, and it didn't work.
Right, because abortion overwhelmed that.
Right.
I mean, this was New York 19 was a swing district. Biden won by a hair in 2020, 1.5 points, but Pat Ryan, I think, won by 4, if I'm correct. So
I think we talked
it's
about that last week.
right,
The
right.
time
So,
flies.
I mean, inflation's not out of the picture. You still see inflation high up in the when the question is asked, what's your top issue? What's the most important issue? But it's certainly complicated by these other things. And Democrats now being, I think, a little bit helped by the fact that prices are coming down. They're still higher than they were, so we're not out of the woods. But there's at least some positive movement for Democrats to point to, and Republicans are not able to really coalesce around. Here's what we're going to do instead. You should count on us to fix inflation because we're going to do X, Y, and Z. They can't even get those words out of their mouths easily. I mean, Trump gets raided, all of a sudden they're talking about Trump being raided, and they're not talking, this Republicans not talking about inflation. So I think they're hamstrung in a bunch of different ways. And because you have lots of polling and special election data that's not pointing in the Republicans' favor, you're getting a circular firing squad dynamic. And
Yeah.
it's not even September yet, which is not helpful for them getting on track between now and November.
And speaking of being hamstrung, though, Bill, it strikes me. So Peter Thiel, again, backed these two candidates. J.D. Vance in Ohio, I think, is probably more mainstream. Blake Masters in Arizona, a little bit weirder of a candidate.
We're grading on a curve. I'll grant that Vance is more mainstream relative to Masters.
Yes.
But I wouldn't call Vance a generic, inoffensive. He's not the small business owner. I'm just the guy who owns Joe's Mugs. I own the local gas station. I'm here to tell you that inflation's killing us. He's not that, but he's not as wackadoodle as Masters.
Well, in any event, it seems unlikely if it hadn't been for Peter Thiel's money and Donald Trump's endorsement, that neither of them would have won. So Peter Thiel and Trump thrust them on us and thrust them on Mitch McConnell. But then Thiel, basically, his theory is, okay, now I can step away. They're not my problem anymore because the Republican Party now it's either them or a Democrat. And so you guys now, Mitch McConnell or whoever, NRSC, you guys fund it. And McConnell is basically saying, like, well, not necessarily. We're going to put our money where we think it needs to go. And they canceled an ad buy in Arizona, for millions of dollars that would have gone to help Masters. But I guess the question is, McConnell is hamstrung, right? Because he wants to be the Senate majority leader again. And so this is a game of chicken, but do you think that at the end of the day, will McConnell swoop in and help Masters put him over the finish line?
Before I answer that directly, I just want to go back to Thiel, because I think what he's doing is stupid. It doesn't serve his own interest. I mean, this is someone who, for what I've read, like, he wants to play in the primaries because he wants to move the party towards his, America First libertarian, vision. And he thinks that once I do that in the primary, my job is done, which is not smart, because if you anoint all these candidates with your money and then they all lose, you are harming your own agenda. The party is not going to want to keep going your way because your candidates can't close the deal. So he should want to get in on the game in the general election to make sure they actually win.
And not only because not only because they need your money, but excuse me, not only because they need your money, but also because honestly, then you could help control the messaging too. That's the other side of it. If you outsource, uh, you know, the fundraising to someone else, if you let someone else fund it, you also lose control of the messaging.
And we talk so much about how big donors are warping democracy and they make Washington the plaything of the special interests. And I'm not saying that special interest influence is a fiction. I just think it gets wielded in different ways than just simply giving money to candidates, because the money they give to candidates tends to actually be kind of a drop in the bucket. It's how they lobby after the election. I think their influence is more noticeable. Thiel's an example of what happens when your party is too uh, tethered to a few individual big money donors, because individual rich people are weird. They're weird. They have their own like vision for society that is disconnected to what average people want. It's not even about like necessarily lining their own pockets. It's that they have so much freaking money they don't know what to do with, and getting into politics is fun for them. So it's not like Peter Thiel is representative of the average Silicon Valley billionaire, because a lot of those guys try to get Democrats elected. But you have a field that has been shaped by two weirdos, Thiel and Trump, without any thought to who's actually good at winning elections. And now you're stuck with them. And if you can't break free of that, if you can't find a way to marshal other resources and political influence, so you're not under their thumb,
Yeah,
you're going to have bad candidates.
but I guess what I'm saying is, it would be poetic justice, and in the long run, it would do good if McConnell let them twist in the wind and let them lose. But he can't do that because his future is tied to their future.
Well, it's hard again, because McConnell is stone cold calculator. We know he will partner up with insane people if it maximizes his own power, with the confidence that he'll get more of what he wants at the end of the day. He's not going to do something on some sort of larger principle if it means his power is diminished. So I don't know if I would assume that if he thought Masters could win and keep him and make him majority leader again, he will put money into Masters' campaign. If he's pulling money away, he thinks he's going to lose, not because he thinks Masters is some sort of not nice person who said mean things about him. Nancy Pelosi stuck with a whole bunch of people who said mean things about her because she knew it wouldn't matter at the end of the day; they'd make her speaker.
Yeah.
I'm sure McConnell thinks the same way. What I don't understand for McConnell is how do you see the math working? Where do you see you getting to 51?
Yeah. If you give up on Masters, how do you get to 51?
They're apparently saying that he just raised money for Oz, Vance, and Walker. Is that right? I thought the super PAC, his super did something for those three recently, and I don't see Oz and Walker being any better position than Masters.
There was a poll that shows Herschel Walker winning. Did you see that?
That did come out. That was from Emerson, which is not necessarily the most reputable of pollsters, and it's the only one in the past several weeks where he's up. Now again, maybe more will come out.
Maybe they're on to something.
But I can't say I've seen anything in that campaign to suggest that Walker's found his groove. And the big Democratic super PAC just put up an ad where he's literally admitting to threatening his wife with a gun, and they have the wife saying this, the ex-wife saying the same thing, and they have a reenactment of the gun at the woman's temple, because with the woman saying he put the gun to my temple. It's what is happening there that would help Walker? I don't know. And Oz's campaign is a total disaster. I can understand McConnell saying, let's cross our fingers and Fetterman looks terrible in the debates because he's recovering from a stroke, and maybe that'll be our Hail Mary.
Now, it's also, as I mentioned, Rick Scott, senator from Florida, who's in charge of the Senate committee right now, um, is criticizing, at least it appears he's criticizing McConnell. McConnell's comment being where he said that the candidate quality could impact things in the Senate, and he thinks it's more likely that the House would flip Republican than the Senate. And Rick Scott is criticizing that. At least that is my interpretation, and others as well in Politico this morning. And this is interesting too. I mean, I would say that Mitch McConnell's political judgment is probably better than Rick Scott's. It just my only guess is that Rick Scott is making a bet right now that by pretending everything's okay, that he might get lucky, and just because it's a Republican wave year, ostensibly, he'll get lucky, and these Republicans are going to win, and then he'll get credit from the Trump world for being the guy who never wavered, and McConnell will be cast as the Eeyore or something to that effect. I don't know. Other than that, what makes sense? What's he up to?
Well, I mean, Scott, I think here's a theory. Scott needs his candidates to win, or he looks like an idiot. He wants to be president for some ridiculous reason. Thinks he has a prayer. He runs ads with his Lex Luthor Skeletor face, in Iowa and Florida, in Iowa and Georgia, thinking he's positioning himself for a 2024 run, which is total lunacy. But obviously, if he can't even win the Senate in a midterm year when starting from a 50-50 place, he's going to look like a total Shamil. McConnell has been around long enough to know that he has power either way. Majority, minority, you still got to run almost everything through him regardless. I mean, the one thing that he can't control in the minority, he can't control judges. Although because Democrats are honoring blue slips, they do have some influence at the district court level. Otherwise, he can't control the judge pipeline as well, and he can't control what happens in reconciliation. But otherwise, almost everything that's gone through bipartisan, his stamp's on it. He shapes it. So he may be relatively okay either way, and feel like, hey, you know what? If I'm playing in enough races that win, I'll get credit. But if we don't, these are my candidates. I didn't pick them. Trump did, and Peter Thiel did, and Rick Scott did. And I'll say your way is a stupid way, and do things my way next time.
Yeah.
So I think it's a better position to spin it either way than Rick Scott is.
The other thing that's interesting is that Rick Scott, I don't think this would have happened a few years ago. I mean, so Mitch McConnell is this kind of graybeard, highly, just very strategic, and he's the Senate leader, the Senate minority leader. Rick Scott hasn't been in the U.S. Senate that long. He's obviously loaded, former governor of Florida, but he works for McConnell in a sense. Obviously, he's not afraid of McConnell. Like, shouldn't it be unwise to criticize McConnell? Shouldn't there be a penalty for that if in a some sort of a normal institution?
Well, McConnell's numbers, his job approval numbers are terrible. So Rick Scott's not going to hurt himself at home. Florida Republicans aren't going to punish him in a primary because he said something, threw some shade McConnell's way. And in fact, almost any candidate could beat up on McConnell at home and not pay a penalty for it. No one, he's not beloved.
I don't mean from the voters. I don't mean from the voters. I mean, you can be in the U.S. Senate and throw shade at Mitch McConnell and nothing happens to you. Like, you think, could you do that with Lyndon Johnson?
I mean, but it's just a different world. The types of horse trading and political punishments, using pork as a weapon, or leaking mean things about enemies to the press. I mean, that kind of stuff just isn't done as readily anymore. So I don't think it phases either one, Scott or McConnell, to have this kind of stuff in the press. I think it doesn't help Republicans writ large if you're having these intra-party squabbles, because it means you're filling up some media space with your own nonsense and not filling it with attacks on Democrats. But McConnell, I suspect, is already thinking, man, we might be kind of screwed no matter what here. This is literally the worst field of Senate candidates ever put on the field in history. I challenge anyone to think of a worse group than this group. And McConnell might be reading the writing on the wall and saying, look, we got to find a way to make this not look like it's my fault.
All right. What else we got?
We haven't talked Alaska.
Oh, yeah. Right. Sarah Palin. So Palin.
The quotable rogue, Sarah Palin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I thought about trying to write about it, but it's hard to write a really good piece about Palin because it's such a weird thing in Alaska, right? Because of the ranked, it's like a jungle primary, but it's not a primary. Everybody's in the same race, and then it's ranked choice. So even though Republicans got 60% of the vote, a Democrat won. And then on top of it all, am I right that they do this all again in November?
Right,
so it's really weird it's hard to write the piece that says like Palin is back or Palin is done or whatever, because I don't even know what's going on.
Well, just to clarify, so there's a new system in Alaska. It was passed by ballot initiative. It was last year, the year before. Some people believe it was Murkowski driven. It would help Murkowski survive general elections because you wouldn't have to win a Republican primary to get on the general election ballot. So you start with a jungle election. Everybody in the pool, everyone's on the same ballot. Who knows how many candidates, and then that gets called into top four for the runoff, and the top four is done ranked choice style. So you can put 1, 2, 3, 4 your candidates in order of preference. And in this case, so you have a special election because Don Young passed away. Alaska has one congressperson. Don Young has been that person for 49 years. Passed away. So this is an election to fill a few months of that term, but there's also the election for the next term, which is in November. And the same people are running essentially in both contests. And for the special, there were 4 people that made the cut, but Al Gross, one of them said, you know what, I don't think I can make it. I'm not going to actively run in August. And he was nominally an independent, but a Democratic-friendly one. That left one, big, capital D Democrat on the ballot and 2 Republicans, Sarah Palin and Nick Begich. It's Pell Rota, who was a Democrat who won. She had 40% first choice votes, Sarah Palin coming in second and Begich coming in third. And so Republicans are very suspicious of ranked choice voting. It hasn't helped them in Maine, where Jared Golden has won 2 elections with ranked choice voting. So Republicans have argued this is convoluted and rigged. She didn't have the most votes. Republicans had the most votes. So it should be a Republican. Now, their argument was different in Maine, where they would say, hey, the Democrat didn't have the most votes on the first choice. The Republican had the most votes, and that person wins thanks to a bunch of Greens swooping in afterwards. In this case, the Democrat had the most votes, just a plurality, but Republicans had the most if you combine them on the first choice. Now, ranked choice should help Republicans in that scenario, in the Alaska scenario, because they had the most votes. If they were a unified party, they would very easily shift from the second favorite Republican to the first favorite Republican, and you win the election. The only reason why they didn't win is because Sarah Palin is not well liked amongst all
Yeah.
Republicans. She
Okay.
was so damaged that a bunch of Republicans made the Democrat second choice. So that's
There's a
not the fault
little
of the ranked choice system. It's the fault of Republicans for being such a mess of a party that they can't get their people on the same page.
two quick things, Bill. One, I think there's like a little static when you're talking. And
I don't know
especially
why.
when you move around. Could it be like, is the mic not completely plugged in, or I don't know?
Well, I'm just using the AirPods and the laptop.
That is so weird. It's happened last week too. I don't know what the deal is. Okay. The other thing, let me ask you this, because ranked choice voting is convoluted. Like, I'm not saying I'm not against it, like, but isn't there a game theory thing where it's not just that I like, let's say that I'm voting for, was it Begich?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, let's say I'm voting for Begich and I want Begich. Isn't there a game theory that says I can't make Palin my second pick?
No.
Because
Rank choice takes that strategy out of the equation. It's safe for a Begich voter to put Palin number 2. If Begich has a shot, then that Palin number 2 vote becomes irrelevant.
okay, so there's no way that helps Begich by not making her number 2.
I mean, you have to. That's called a bullet vote. I mean, if you bullet vote, you make Begich number 1, you don't do anybody else. Eric Adams ran that way. Eric Adams, people would say, well, who's your number 2? Who's your number 3? And he was like, I don't have any number 2. Just vote Eric Adams. Um, that doesn't really help you mathematically. Because again, if you're going to win, then your first choice votes are going to be in play. Your second choice will only matters if you drop off and you weren't going to win anyway.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's no risk in putting down a 2 or 3. The political sort of risk is, are you muddying your own message by putting other candidates' names in the mix coming out of your mouth? But again, that was a primary, mind you. This is a general in Alaska. So you're effectively only dealing with 3 people. So, Begich has to talk smack about Palin so he gets more first choice votes. But his people don't harm him by making Palin number 2. They might be dissuaded for doing so because they're so mad at Palin because of the things Begich has said about her or what she's done to herself. But strategically speaking, they're both Republicans. They both believe much the same thing. The safe thing, if you want a Republican in that seat, the safe thing is to make Begich 1 and Palin 2.
Okay, so but this is going to happen again in 3 months.
Correct.
And so do Republican voters now learn the lesson? I'm still going to vote Begich 1, but I'll make Palin my number 2.
It depends how mad they are. I mean, Palin got only half of Begich number 2s. About 30% went to Pelrota, and the rest went away because they voted for someone else farther down the ballot, or just skipped putting down a choice. So if they wake up today and say, crap, we got a Democrat, I didn't want that, I'm not going to make that mistake next time, then maybe. But if they said, thank God, because I really freaking hated Sarah Palin, and Pearl didn't seem so bad to me, then they won't. That's what ranked choice is supposed to accomplish, to allow, because it's very rare that everyone is perfectly satisfied by whoever wins, because people are on a broader political spectrum than we give them credit for. But it's supposed to get you towards the middle. Find the person who is the most acceptable combination of number 1, number 2 choices, which, just based on the data, like, worked in this case. There was a quirky example for Burlington mayor several years ago where a third party candidate won, and because the Democrat because the Democrat had dropped off early, that those second choice votes, okay, I'm sorry, because the Democrat dropped off early, a good number of the Republican candidates, number twos, didn't get factored in because he'd already been cut out of the deal. So it's not like ranked choice voting always works perfectly. You can't have quirky outcomes. But in this case, this worked the way the system's supposed to work. Palin's support was thin, and that just got exposed in the ranked choice voting process.
I mean, I think that people who are complaining about the fact that Republicans got 60% are either A, doing it because it's what you say. I mean, it's just a politically convenient argument to make, or B, they see the world as a team sport and a struggle between two parties, not between individuals. And so I guess it depends on how you look at it.
I mean, Tom Cotton, I saw put out that tweet.
That's who Tom Cotton said that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe he may recognize it, doesn't want to admit it. This is a symptom of the disease in your party. Your party is not unified. That's your problem. Fix that problem, and you don't have to worry about ranked choice voting in Alaska. They want to get a pass. They want you to look away from the division of the party, and assume that because there's R next to your name, that the R should win.
That's exactly how Trump got elected. I mean, because the rules, the first past the post rules, and the binary choice, Republican voters who really didn't like Donald Trump in 2016 were given the option Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. That's it. And so, I think that I'm sure it's not a surprise to me that ranked choice voting has emerged at this time, maybe in response to what happened with Donald Trump taking over the Republican primary with a plurality and then forcing this binary choice with Hillary Clinton as the other option. I mean, if there's ever been an argument for ranked choice voting, it would be 2016.
Now, if you're a McConnell type Republican, you're thinking, how can I get these Trumpers out of my freaking party? Start pushing ranked choice voting. Like, this is what can potentially keep the Trumpers away from winning these primaries with very small pluralities. And you get more Chamber of Commerce, small business owner type Republicans who aren't going to blow it in the general election.
It's really funny how the rules predict the outcome. I mean, the rule, in some cases, the rules are arbitrary, and yet they will predict the outcome. And a lot of our current political dysfunction is a product of the specific rules that we had in place. And I think for a long time, they really served us very largely well. But obviously, things have changed.
Well, but I think you have to be careful to assume that if I only get the process that I want, I'm going to get the outcomes that I want, because you still have to win elections, you still have to organize people, you still have to have good candidates. I mean, a lot of ranked choice voting activism has come from the Green Party because they want to get rid of the wasted vote argument. And they think, well, if there's no more wasted votes because your vote will still get counted, then your inner green will come forth and everyone will vote for these third-party candidates and they'll actually win. Now, you see how this has worked in Maine. The Greens still have terrible candidates and only get 2-3% of the vote, and their votes just get thrown to the Democrat after the ranked choice process kicks in, and you end up with the more moderate candidate. Now, maybe if you had like a really, really good Green candidate or a really good Libertarian candidate who had some political experience and was good on the stump and can raise money, maybe that math will end up working in your favor with the help of ranked choice. But it hardly is magical powder that allows an unpopular fringe party to become popular. At minimum, you have to understand the rules of the game. If you're in a ranked choice election, you have to treat it like a ranked choice election. You can't treat it like a base election. If all I need is the Trumper fringe, and that will be sufficient because the Republicans will naturally come home. It clearly does not work that way. There was an Oakland mayor's race. There's a fair amount of ranked choice voting in the Bay Area. She hustled. This was a Jean Quan. She hustled for second choice votes. She would go out there and say, "Hey, I'm your first choice. That's cool. Please think of me for your number two." She's building a coalition that way. You have it's very similar to
Lincoln wasn't Abraham Lincoln's. He was everybody's second pick eventually, and that's
he
how
was
he emerged through. I don't know how many rounds.
He was a super. I mean, a lot of those early, old school conventions. They would play the people who were dark horses would say, you know what, we're not going to be everyone's first choice out of the bat, and a lot of these old conventions had the 2/3 thresholds. So it was very hard to actually get all the way to the finish line. So a person might start with 55%, and then after like 6, 7, 8 ballots, they'd kind of stall out, and their people would get frustrated. And then the dark horse would swoop in and say, "Hey, your guy can't make it. Your guy can't get to 2/3. Give up. Here's how my guy can get to 2/3, but I need you to kind of get the ball rolling." And these kinds of waves of activity would materialize on the floor. So it's it's not literally ranked choice voting, but there's certain, overlapping elements. So you got to understand the rules of the game. When the primary calendar changed with the George McGovern reforms post 1968, George McGovern was the guy who understood it and ran an election that took advantage. I mean, he didn't have real broad support in 72 in the primaries, but he knew where he needed the support to have sufficient delegate strength to win at the convention. And the guys who were playing under old rules didn't adapt. You got to know the rules of the game. And if you're in Alaska, at least, I mean, obviously most Republicans have to deal with ranked choice voting, but if you're in a state that has it, you better figure it out.
So, Bill, before we go, big news, I guess, this week was the death of Mikhail Gorbachev, the last president of the Soviet Union. I think that he's gotten a lot of, positive kind of obituaries and remembrances. But what was your take on Gorby?
I've written a little bit about Reagan and Gorbachev. I wrote a piece a while back about the Reykjavik summit, which I think is not well understood, because the Republican narrative of that was, Gorbachev wanted Reagan to give up, Star Wars, and Reagan wouldn't do it, and Reagan stormed off, and that was how Reagan, was it the tough guy versus Gorbachev, and the Soviet Union crumbled after that, and it leaves out a lot of, developments that followed Reykjavik. I mean, so what happened there was, it wasn't supposed to be a big summit. It was supposed to be kind of a pre-summit. It's supposed to kind of prep for the next summit. And Gorbachev comes in with a lot of big, bold arms control reduction proposals, cutting their nukes by 50%. And the Reaganites were thrown. And there's a big gamesmanship with these things. If someone's trying to be the nice guy and offer cuts, you don't want to look like the bad guy. So they start trying to one-up each other with the cuts. At one point, Reagan blurts out, "Let's just do away with all nuclear weapons." And Gorbachev says, "Yeah, let's do it." And that's when Star Wars and SDI came into the mix, and Reagan wouldn't budge on that. But it was just a very weird, loosey-goosey thing. Like, it wasn't like Reagan had prepared to put that on the table. People were really, ad-libbing. And this is right before the 86 midterm, and right before Iran-Contra breaks, which happens right after the midterm. And Reagan is really embroiled in Iran-Contra for several months. And in that period, Gorbachev gets the advice from his team, you know what, this Star Wars thing's never going to get off the ground. It's a big waste of money. Don't make it a big deal about it. And Gorbachev eventually relayed that to Reagan directly. He said, "I don't care if you waste your money on it. But let's do something more modest. Let's get rid of these mid-range nuclear missiles." And this was in the spring of 87. And Reagan is so tied up in Iran-Contra, he's looking for a win. And so he grabs onto it. Let's do it. They do what became the INF Treaty. And at that time, a lot of conservatives were not happy with Reagan. Jesse Helms, I think Buckley was against it. William F. Buckley. And Reagan puts out there a message that says, you know what, some of these people in my party, they think that war is inevitable. But I think if you have a chance for peace, you gotta try for peace. He really saw something in Gorbachev they didn't see in the past Soviet leaders that a lot of conservatives were skeptical of. If you saw George Will's obit this week, George Will never was a big Gorbachev fan. He thinks he just sort of like blundered into destroying communism, that he was sort of stuck in the old ways. And it's true that Gorbachev never renounced communism fully, but he clearly was a different cat than the past.
You know what? I forget where I read this, but a lot of Soviet leader, because Stalin was so bad. There were, I think, more than maybe several Soviet leaders whose ancestors, parents, grandparents had been persecuted by Stalin. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe Gorbachev had a relative who was sent to the Gulag or Siberia or something. And that could be an interesting factor in Stalin.
Khrushchev, who followed Stalin, Khrushchev gave the so-called secret speech, which revealed to a lot of people the horrible things that Stalin did. So, Stalin's legacy was always, complicated for the Soviets, and they were straining the arms race back then too. It's the arms. You can give Reagan and conservatives some credit for bankrupting the Soviets and pressuring them economically with the arms race. But at the same time, you got to give Reagan credit for pivoting, for recognizing that. Because what conservatives are mad about is why are you giving them a lifeline? We're squeezing them on the arms race. Now you give them a lifeline by having these cuts. Why are you doing that? Reagan was enough of a three-dimensional person to see there was value in drawing the Soviets out and encouraging glasnost and perestroika. And even George Bush following Reagan, he wasn't trying to undercut Gorbachev. They were trying to keep the Soviet Union together and help Gorbachev. When things started to really fall apart for him, and because they just saw Gorbachev as a guy worth working with, and whether that was a good idea or not, it depends on your perspective. On one hand, the Soviet Union did collapse, and more republics were able to be created out of the former Soviet empire. On the other hand,
and then you would have nuclear weapons being.
Well, they were. I think they were very much worried about that, and it ended up creating a power vacuum that Putin was able to walk into when Yeltsin became weak. So it's hard to have clean takes out of all this, but my own takeaway is that Gorbachev is an example of the individual people in power mattering. It wasn't just, yes, there were external factors that pressured him, but he still behaved differently than all of his predecessors did, despite those pressures. He wasn't the first guy to deal with economic pressures in the Soviet Union. He could have been a Putin that tried to cling to power through tanks and invasions, which he purposely did not do. He got out of Afghanistan. He let the republics go their own way, at least some of them initially. And I think he offers a degree of hope that maybe there's another Gorbachev in Russia today somewhere that no one knew Gorbachev existed in 1982. No one in America eyed, that guy's gonna make it someday and really transform things from the inside. We don't know who could be in the Kremlin right now. It could be that guy. Putin can't live forever, and he's obviously harming himself by getting involved in a stupid invasion of Ukraine that's sapping their military. Their economy is not great. So I see Gorbachev as a beacon of hope that these people can and will materialize at some point.
If only we had a Reagan. It was ready to to meet the moment as well. But no, I tend to agree. You know, the great man of the theory of politics or of history gets criticized, and I understand why. But it's also true that people matter and leadership matters, and we can't discount that as well.
I mean, I think it was in the Times obit that said, Gorbachev restored Europe to what it was before World War II, which was a collection of independent, individual states. I mean, you look at people who freed, like you count the number of people he freed on his watch. It's in the millions. So I mean, maybe don't give him like the entirety of the credit because of these other factors, but like he could have tried to steamroll them and oppress them further and cling to power, and he didn't.
All right, Bill, anything you want to promote this week?
Well, we talked a little bit about the midterms before. Check out my piece in the Monthly from as late last week, how Democrats can keep the House, which talks about these party division issues on the Republican side and how Democrats can be the balancers. Democrats could be the balancers in this election and survive in a way that is atypical but not unprecedented.
I want to commend to you my podcast this week, Bill. After a summer where I ran a few reruns, bounced back strong this week. Had Chris Steyerwalt on to talk about his book Broken News. Had Simon Rosenberg on to talk about. I don't know if you remember, Simon was on my podcast about 6 weeks ago saying, "Don't believe the conventional wisdom. Democrats are going to do really well in the midterms." I had him back to do a little bit of a victory tour, or at least to explain what he got right and what he thinks is going to happen. Talk to Todd Rose, who is this really Dr. Todd Rose is a brilliant guy who I think he was at Harvard for a while, and he has come up with this way of measuring what people really believe. So in other words, people tell pollsters what they think they want to hear, but there is a way that we talk about in this podcast, a very sophisticated way of discerning what people really believe. And it is dramatically different. So whether it's the issue of abortion or wearing masks, we are self-censoring, and it's not good for us. It's not good for society. So we had a great talk about that, what Americans really think. And then I just talked to Eboo Patel. That this podcast has not gone live yet, but he has a book, We Need to Build. And basically, it talks about how he started off kind of as an angry activist, but that's fine. But then at some point, you need to start building institutions if you want to bring about change. And that's what that book is about. So a whole bunch of content to listen to at Matt Lewis in the News. So check that out. As always, read my my stuff at the Daily Beast as well.
Excellent. Good to talk to you, Matt. And
always good talking to you, Bill Scher.
We'll do it again next week.
All right. See you back here in the DMZ.